Pitt's offense is definitely going to be better in 2023 than it was in 2022, and we've got 3 reasons why. Plus, we've got 3 reasons why the offense maybe won't be better than it was in 2022. We're going to be going back and forth on the offense today on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's a Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Midweek as we roll closer and closer to the season opener against Wofford on Saturday at Acrisure Stadium. That game's at 3:30 kickoff. You know all those details already. Looking forward to it. I think we're all counting down the days to get that game started and get the season started and actually find out at least a little bit of who these Pitt Panthers are. And, we can go back and forth and debate about what we'll actually find out about this team on Saturday. My guess is not very much, particularly as it relates to the offense, but we're actually going to see them in action and see them on the field and see them play and find out, a little bit more. We'll know more about Pitt coming out of Saturday's game than we do going in. So that's always something to look forward to. Of course, you know the deal here on the Morning Pitt. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. It's the website Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And then our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's the place where we do all these Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday. We have our weekly live show like we'll be doing tonight at 8:30 p.m. Me and Jim Hammock get together to talk about Pitt sports. Pretty fun conversation as always. We have interviews, and we'll have our first live post-game show of the season this Saturday, a couple hours after the game against Wofford ends. I'll obviously be at the stadium for the game. Stay for an hour or two after the game to do some post-game stuff, press conferences and whatnot. Probably 1 hour, I would say, and then we'll get back here to the Panther-Lair studios and do the live post-game show. Probably, I'm guessing we'll start around 8 or 9, somewhere around there. Maybe 9 o'clock is a good time to shoot for. We'll get a beer and we'll talk about the game and what we thought and all those kinds of things. Looking forward to it. Don't lock me in on that 9 o'clock start time just yet. We'll have a start time a little bit closer to the actual game. We figure out what we're going to do. But you don't want to miss any of that stuff, so make sure you like this video and subscribe. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then you'll be locked in for all of our Pitt video content that we have right here on this video channel. So we're moving closer to this game, and the biggest questions I think everyone is asking, or some of the biggest questions everyone is asking, is about Pitt's offense and whether it's going to be better in 2023 than it was in 2022. And I thought I'd play a little devil's advocate against myself here today and give you 3 reasons why it will be better and 3 reasons why maybe it won't. But what is better? Like, what constitutes better? You know what I mean? Like, how are we going to define Pitt's offense being better? I can, in sort of loose general terms, without getting into specifics, I can say that their passing game needs to be more effective. And I think everyone would agree with that assessment. I think the Pitt coaches would agree with that assessment, that their passing, they need to be better in the passing game. They need to be able to attack through the air, and they obviously need to do more than 13 passing touchdowns over the course of a 12 or 13 game season. I mean, shoot, they need to do better than 13 passing touchdowns whether they played a 10-game season. They need to have more than 13 passing touchdowns. And to average 1 passing touchdown per game, that's pretty bad. It's as evidenced by the fact that Keaton Slovis went like a month without throwing a touchdown pass in the middle of the season, which not coincidentally overlapped with, a couple of back-to-back losses that the team suffered in the month of October. So in the loosest, most general terms, what does getting better in 2023 mean? It means having a better passing game. But what it all comes down to is points. It all comes down to scoring. And in that regard, I think it's interesting to look at what Pitt's offense did last year in terms of scoring and in terms of sort of the historical context of scoring. And now when we're talking about scoring, we're not just talking about what you'll see when you look up points per game, because last year Pitt averaged 31.3 points per game, right? And that's a decent total. That's 10 points less per game than the 2021 team scored, but the 2021 team had a lot of obviously had a lot of firepower, but at 31.3, it's right up there with one of the, Pat Narduzzi's only had 3 teams that average more than 31.3 points per game. But of course, within that 31.3 points per game, we've got 3 touchdowns from MJ Devonshire. We've got 2 touchdowns from Marquez Williams. 1 touchdown from Brandon Hill. So that's 6 touchdowns that are getting added into the scoring total, in addition to Ben Saul's 20 field goals. They're all getting added into the scoring total that don't necessarily reflect on the offense. And I don't count field goals as reflecting well on the offense. Well, the offense had to set up those field goals. Like when Ben Saul kicked out 5 field goals in the Sun Bowl against UCLA, it was like, oh, well, that's good on the offense for getting them into range. No, man, a field goal is a failure. A made field goal is a success for the kicker, but a field goal attempt, whether it's made or not, is a failure on the part of the offense. I would say almost across the board, almost without exception, a field goal is a win for the defense. And the exceptions to that would be very, very few. Maybe you pushed yourself out of field goal range on second down with a bad play that's set up on a third and 20 or something, and you were able to get enough yards to get back into field goal range, but that's just a win because you already lost by a lot. A field goal is a failure. So I'm not going to count that as offensive success. Touchdowns. Touchdowns are what matter, and last year's team scored 43 touchdowns. That's the third most of any team in the Narduzzi era. 43 offensive touchdowns. The high water mark was in 2021. They scored 70 offensive touchdowns. In 2016, they scored 64 offensive touchdowns. Then comes third place, the 2022 team. 2018, they scored 42 touchdowns, but of course that comes with a little bit of a caveat because the 2018 team scored 42 touchdowns over the course of 14 games. And so when we sort these teams, we sort Pat Narduzzi's 8 teams according to touchdowns per game, offensive touchdowns per game, all right? Because it actually kind of counts against the 2016 team as well because they had a bunch of return touchdowns. So while that team averaged 40.9 points per game, the reality is they got a lot of help from Quadri Henderson in the return game. They still scored a lot, though. 64 offensive touchdowns in 13 games. It's almost 5 touchdowns per game. And that's really good. If you could average 5 touchdowns per game, you're a pretty good offense. But when we sort these teams according to touchdowns per game, the 2020 offensive touchdowns per game, I should say, the 2022 team checks in with 3.3 offensive touchdowns per game. That doesn't sound like very much to me. I don't know about you, but 3 touchdowns per game, 3.3 touchdowns per game doesn't exactly inspire confidence. That's not the kind of offense that you're going to need to win a lot and consistently in the ACC, particularly if your defense takes a little bit of a step back from the level it played at a year ago. 3.3 touchdowns, I mean, you're talking about 21, sometimes 27 points per game, 28 points per game from your touchdowns. You'll get a little bit of extra on top with the field goals. But I think the goal always has to be to get out of the 30s. Or, excuse me, get into the 30s. Get out of the 20s. And averaging 3 offensive touchdowns per game is not going to cut it. So last year's team averaged 31.3 points per game as a team, but that was with 6 defensive touchdowns and 20 field goals. 43 offensive touchdowns, 3.3 offensive touchdowns per game is not 31 points per game. And it's not good enough. It's not good enough for what this team needs to be able to do to succeed. Now, that is still the third highest average of offensive touchdowns per game of any Narduzzi team. Here again, the 2021 team leads the way. They averaged 5 offensive touchdowns per game. 2016 team averaged 4.9. They were just under that 5 touchdown per game mark, so pretty close between those two. And then you have this past year's team. The 2022 team averaged 3.3 offensive touchdowns per game. This year's team, the 2023 team, I think needs to be in the 4 offensive touchdown per game range. That's 52 touchdowns. They've only had 2 teams under Narduzzi who have scored 52 offensive touchdowns. And one of them did it in a 14 game season with a Heisman Trophy finalist as the quarterback and a Biletnikoff Award winner at the wide receiver position. And the other was the 2016 team, which scored 64 in 13 games. With a very creative offense that maximized its playmakers and took advantage of the fact that it had senior leadership and all those things. That's got to be the goal, though. I think that has to be the goal, to average 4 offensive touchdowns per game, which means scoring 52 offensive touchdowns over the course of 13 games. they're happen to make it to the ACC championship game, we will increase that average or that total target to 56. But for now, we're going to stick with 52 as the target. That's what they need to do. How do they make that up? Well, last year they scored 43 touchdowns with 30 rushing and 13 passing. So you can figure out where the extra touchdowns need to come from. It needs to come from the passing game. Will the passing game get better? Because that's ultimately the question we're asking when we say, will the offense get better? So 3 reasons why it will. Why the offense will get better, why the passing game will get better. The number one reason, and it's something we've talked about a lot, and it's something we've talked about, the coaches have talked about, the players have talked about, and I've talked about it because those guys have talked about it, is the familiarity factor. And I dismissed this initially. Initially, I looked at this and I said, get out of here with this. Get out of here. Come on. Familiarity. I don't care if you're familiar. You need to play better. You need to do this or that. Call better plays. All that stuff. But I've given it more and more credence. And what's interesting is you look over the course of the Narduzzi era, when they've had a coordinator for more than 1 year, so we're discounting 2015 and 16, obviously, each time the offensive touchdowns per game increased in the second year. Sean Watson in 2017, they averaged 2.8 offensive touchdowns per game over the course of 12 games. The next year, they averaged 3. It was like 3 right on the dot. They scored 42 touchdowns in 14 games. And that was not a good offense, but they did improve. They scored more. They scored 42 touchdowns in 14 games as opposed to the previous year. They scored 33 in 12 games. So the offense improved in offensive touchdowns per game. Same thing with Mark Whipple. Mark Whipple's first year was arguably the worst offense of the Narduzzi era. And maybe not arguably. They scored 28 offensive touchdowns in 13 games. 11 rushing touchdowns, 17 passing touchdowns, averaged 2.2 offensive touchdowns per game. That is a miserably bad total. 2.2 touchdowns per game on offense. You can't win averaging 2 offensive touchdowns per game. You can't. A year later, it increased by almost a whole touchdown per game. 2020, they averaged 3.1 offensive touchdowns per game, and that's with Kenny Pickett missing a couple of games due to that injury he suffered at Boston College. And then, of course, a giant jump from year 2 to year 3, where they go from 3.1 offensive touchdowns per game to 5 offensive touchdowns per game in 2021. My point is this. It has improved every time. Every time they've had a coordinator for a second year, the offense has gotten better. And I think it is due to the familiarity with the offense. Somebody said it to me during training camp. The players the players have a better idea of what they're trying to do, what the offense is trying to do, what the system is trying to do, what it's all sort of built to do. They had a better idea of it, and so they were playing better in it. The offense should improve because they have a better understanding of it. And obviously, Phil Kovic is a big part of that. And this is reason number 2. The wide receivers having a better understanding of the offense, the running backs having a better understanding of the offense, the offensive line having a better understanding of the offense, the tight ends. It's all hugely valuable. And I think it will make all of those players at those positions play better this year. And then you've got a quarterback who is not just in his second year of the offense, but he's in like his third, right? Third, because he had 2 years with Frank Cignetti at Boston College, and now this year. And so this is my second thing of reasons that the offense should be better is Phil Kovic. Talented player, talented physical skills. No question about why he was rated as highly as he was and why he was pursued as strongly as he was by colleges coming out of high school. And then he's got those physical talents and he's got the knowledge and the understanding of the offense. It seems like it should work. I mean, that's a pretty good combination to have. And then the third thing that I think creates, the third reason I think this offense will be better is because of the offensive line. And I know they lost Ryan Jacoby. That's a blow to lose him for the whole season, replace him with Jason Collier, a fifth-year senior who hasn't really done much over the course of the first 4 years of his Pitt career. But with Matt Gonsalves, with Brandon Taylor, Jake Cradle, Blake Sabovic, Ryan Bear are coming off the bench, the depth is a little bit, the depth is being tested more without Jacoby. And kind of the fallout from that, the ripple effect from that. But on the whole, this offensive line, if those 5 guys that they're going to be counting on, stay healthy, they're going to be, I think they're going to be a strength of the team. And in Pitt's best years, the offensive line has been a strength of the team. Even in 2021, the offensive line was very good. 2016, the offensive line was very good. The years when Pitt has scored the most under Pat Narduzzi, they have also had their best offensive lines. This should be an offensive line that is in that conversation. So those are 3 reasons that I think you should be optimistic. I think the familiarity thing is big. I think Phil Kovic, his familiarity and his just natural talents, is huge for this offense. And the offensive line, I think, is the key to this whole thing working. And now the 3 things that maybe aren't so good. The 3 reasons why this offense won't be better. And the number 1, and there's going to be a lot of overlap. There's going to be a lot of looking back at what we said about reasons why it will get better and then saying, yeah, but. So our first reason why the offense maybe won't get better is, I talked about all the familiarity with the scheme, and they all know the offense and they all know the scheme, and that's great, but what if the scheme was part of the problem last year? We're all quick to dump on Kedon Slovis, and a lot of it deservedly so, but I don't think we can completely absolve the people who are designing and calling the plays, and let them entirely off the hook for the offense last year, because it seems like there's more to it than just one guy. And believe me, media, fans, coaches, players, everybody is more than happy to put that on Kedon Slovis and say, he sucked, that's why the offense sucked, that's why the team only won 9 games last year. And I do have to always add that caveat that they did win 9 games. They did win the Sun Bowl. They did have, they won 5 games in a row to end the regular season, or to end the season, I should say. But you always can counter that by saying they lost multiple games they should have won. And largely because of the offense. And if they had won those games, they would have put themselves in position to play for the ACC championship. So those caveats always come with it. Familiarity is a great thing. It should have you better prepared and ready to execute the system that you're familiar with. But if there are flaws in the system, or flaws in the way it's called, or flaws in the way it's designed or deployed, then being all that familiar with it and better prepared to execute it, I'm not sure that's a great thing. So it's good that they know what they're supposed to do in this offense. But if it's not a good scheme, if it's a bad scheme, if it's a bad offense, it's not going to make a whole lot of a difference. The second thing is just the depth at wide receiver. And this may seem like a small thing, and I'm as high on these freshmen as everybody else. I think they're going to be great. Kenny Johnson and Lamar Seymour and Zion Fowler-El, and whose name am I forgetting? Izzy Polk. I'm really excited about those guys, about what some of them are going to do this year and what all of them are going to do over the course of the next few seasons. But the reality is they're true freshmen. And if you have one injury or so, if you have one big injury, God forbid 2, you're going to have freshmen out there in primary roles. And it's not like it can't happen. It's not like Tyler Boyd didn't start here from day 1. It's not like Jordan Addison didn't start here from day 1, or Larry Fitzgerald started here from day 1. I don't know if these guys are Larry Fitzgerald or Tyler Boyd or Jordan Addison. I think they're good players. I think they'll have good careers, and I think some of them will have good seasons this year. But every time you lose a veteran to an injury or whatever, that's one more unproven freshman who's going to have to step into one of those primary roles. And that's the case at a lot of positions. But everywhere else on offense, at least, guys who are going to touch the football, whether it's the tight ends, receivers, the running backs, or excuse me, not the wide receivers, the tight ends or the running backs, they've got more veteran depth than the receivers have. And I think you're that much closer to relying on really unproven guys who have never played college football before. You're that much closer to relying on that level of guys at receiver than you are at some of these other positions. And so that's a concern for me. The third reason why this offense might not be better in 2023 is, quite simply, there's no precedent for any of these guys to do any of the things we're talking about them doing. Konate Mumpfield had a big year at Akron. There's no doubt about it. He still didn't score that many touchdowns. I think he's a really talented player. I think he's going to be a really good player. I've been high on him since Pitt got him. I think he was I don't think he played. I don't think he showed what he could really be last season at Pitt. But we're sort of projecting that he can actually be that at the ACC level. Bub Means, and I say this as the primary engineer of the Bub Means hype train, what have we seen from Bub Means other than a couple games, a few flashes at the end of the season, and a whole lot of training camp hype and spring camp hype? What have we seen from Bub Means? What has Bub Means actually showed us that he could do? Rodney Hammond has looked great at times. But have we seen him do it for a full season? Have we seen him go out there and play 11 games and consistently produce week after week? Gavin Bartholomew, as the second fiddle in 2021, was really good. He was throwing the ball more last year and caught the ball less last year. Malcolm Epps has very little career production. Jake Renda has none. Carter Johnson has a little bit more than Renda, but not much. The wide receivers we just talked about, Mumfield, Means, Dejon Reynolds, can he do what he did against Vanderbilt against every other opponent on Pitt's schedule? The freshmen haven't played at all. I mean, obviously, there's no precedent for any of these guys to play at that level. There's no precedent for Phil Kovic to stay on the field for 12 games or 13 games and to play under control and with accuracy. And I believe all of these things are possible. I even believe a good number of them will happen. But it's just based on, well, this is what we're hearing. There's no actual precedent for these things to happen. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to happen. But we're staking a lot of the hope for this offense on, well, if this guy does this, and if this guy does this, and if this guy does this, and if this guy does this. And all those things we're listing there are things that these guys have not done in their careers. Sort of clinging to a wave of hope, if you will. And again, I'm not trying to be a downer here, because I do think Bub Means is going to be awesome this year, and I think Konate Mumfield is going to be awesome this year, and I think Phil Dracovic is going to have that kind of college season that was expected out of him when he was coming out of Pine Richland. I think a lot of these things are going to happen. I think the tight ends are going to be better. I think the running backs will be just fine. I do expect this offense to take a step forward, but if you need 3 reasons why it won't happen, well, there they are. And if you want one really big reason, it's because we're staking a lot of hope on things that have not happened. Doesn't mean they can't happen. Doesn't mean they won't happen. They haven't. Not yet. I wondered if I should do it the other way around and finish with the 3 reasons why Pitt's offense will get better. But that's not the way it went. And I think it had to go the other. I think I had to do the downside later, second, just to have the reference points back to the things we talked about at the beginning. I'll ask Jim Hammond about that tonight. Don't forget to tune in 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com for the live Panther-Lair show. The great thing about that is you can tune in you can chime in with your comments and your questions. You can post questions, post comments. We'll answer the questions. We'll respond to the comments. We'll have as much conversation as you want to have for an hour tonight. Should be a lot of fun. 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe, and that way you won't miss any of our video content at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, check out the website Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, everything. It's right there at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with other Pitt fans. So thanks for tuning in today. It wasn't a downer. We're fine. We're all good here. We'll be fine, and we'll keep an eye on Pitt's offense and see what they're capable of. I think they'll be good, but there are reasons to have your doubts if you have them. All right. Thanks for tuning in. I hope your week is off to a great start through the first couple of days. It's the middle of the week. We're getting closer to the season opener. So we will talk to you again. We'll talk to you for the live show tonight, and then we'll be back with you tomorrow for another Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.